one of us like gets it wrong.
Good morning. We got folks in here out of the foyer. All right. Well, for those of you who might not know me, my name is Ellen Greenwood. My pronouns are she and her, and I am the worship associate for this service at Westside Unitarian Universalist Church. It is very much a privilege for me to welcome you here to Westside. Those of you here in person, face-to-face, mask-to-mask, or those of you, watching us on the live stream on YouTube. Always remember that each one of us, whether in person or watching on YouTube, is welcome here, and all of who we are as individuals is welcome here. Our minister, the Reverend Carol Baudot, is currently taking a few weeks sabbatical leave. However, we have a strong tradition here at Westside of wonderful lay-led services, and I think we have one of those for you this morning. Today, Curtis Dush and Elizabeth Corbett will be talking with us about reproductive justice in the wake of the recent Supreme Court decision overturning Roe v. Wade. First, before we really begin, we do have a few announcements. These are in your order of service, so please take a quick look at those. We continue to have our regular religious exploration opportunities. On Wednesday nights, a group meets on Zoom under the title Thinking About Theology. And then on Thursday nights, another group of us meet for a Thursday evening conversation. We talk about theology sometimes. We talk about all kinds of things. So there always are wonderful conversations, though. And you are more than welcome to join at any time for either one of these conversation groups. And the Zoom link is in the newsletter for each of these. Our second Monday lunch will be September 12th at 11:30 at the Olive Garden. You need to contact either Diane Gray or Judy Burgett so that they will know how many to expect that day. And on Sunday, September 18th, we are having some fun. It's a fall fun kids event. So bring your kids, bring your grandkids, bring your neighbor kids to this special event. There will be a scavenger hunt, cornhole, crafts, and great food. So you'll be hearing more about this, but mark your calendars now. Save the date. Our next Earth Church East Tennessee meeting is September 25th at 3 p.m. And at this time, Reverend Carol Baudot will lead an Earth-centered gathering. It's always at each month close to the new moon. We sit in a sacred circle and share experiences of inspiration in nature. And there's always usually food and fellowship too, I think. And then another save the date, this one is important also. Our fall auction will be Saturday, October 15th, outdoors at Westside. So start thinking about what kinds of services and dinners you might want to offer. And you'll be getting more information on this soon also. So our finance chair, Ann Harvey, will have more information forthcoming for that. And just pester Ann if you want to know more. She's right back there. Okay, I think that's all of our announcements. As we center our thoughts and focus our time together, we need to kind of still our minds a little bit, and to help us do this, Sandra has some opening music. Thank you, Sandra. The Tibetan singing bowl calls us to quiet our minds and come together in the comfort and support of this loving community. I can't begin to tell you how much I really hate to introduce this next part of our service, but before we light our chalice, we need to light a very special candle, and I would invite Dave Goforth and Mike Fisher to come forward at this time.
Mike's going to join me here in a second. I think he had to run out and do something with his phone real quick. But real quick introduction, my name's Dave Goforth, and I've been coming here for about 25 years, and I've known Carol Coffey that whole time. And a lot of you probably don't know me because I don't always show up on the Sunday service. But I do work in the yard a lot and work on the building along with other folks, including Jonas, Jerry Thornton, and everyone. So So anyway, I don't know if you've heard, but Carol Coffey, our current president, passed away last week, kind of unexpectedly. And I could talk about Carol for a long time because I've got 25 years of adventures and doing stuff with him, but I made a few notes so I don't ramble on. So I'd like to say a few words of remembrance for our best friend, Carol Coffey, and that's a lot of us, his best friend, but especially Mike Fisher and myself. Since coming to Westside 25 years ago, we've shared many good times and adventures with Carol. I feel honored to say he was a best friend and that his son, Andrew Coffey, called me first to let me know. And we chatted for about a half hour or so. Got the history there. Carol was the type of guy who would live out his passions by getting involved with organizations that supported those passions. Besides serving as president at Westside, again, he was an active board member with the Southern Appalachian Highland Conservatory, or SAHC. SAHC worked to keep the high country of Northeast Tennessee pristine, passion of Carol's. Carol did all the legwork with being involved with SAHC, going to the meetings, doing Zoom calls before there was a Zoom thing. It's usually a phone message thing. And his friends rode his coattails to join him with implementation of stuff that was important. None of us went to the meetings, didn't even belong to the organizations. During his working years, he was a dentist specializing in root canals. And he gave a discount to his friends. And I include myself as a friend and Mike Fisher as a friend, and I don't know who else here has had root canals from dentists, Carol, but every time I smile, you can probably see his work. So, anyway, Carol developed a passion for skiing in his 40s and bought a condo on the slopes of Powder Mountain out near Ogden, Utah. He would go out to the condo for 1 to 3 months at a time in the winter and ski. After several years of asking me to come out, I finally said okay, even though I was kind of a mediocre skier. But I ended up going out for 10 years in a row, sometimes staying for like 5 weeks. And it's ruined me because now it's sticker shock. I could stay out there and ski with a pass, and the whole month didn't cost me $1,000, and I paid for all the food and gas and everything. But anyway, with Carol's tutoring, I became as good a skier. In fact, I would say better than he was. And he was a good skier. So, and his condo served as a base for other friends and family to join us, including Mike and I, and my wife Elizabeth. I don't know if I told you I'm married to that lovely lady. But so Carol, Mike, Elizabeth, and myself shared many a lift ride together out in Powder Mountain. And it was really a joyous time. And I think Mike's going to say a few words different from mine, I hope.
Some of them.
Yeah.
So for 21 years, Carol coordinated the Roney Boys, which we were members of, on a trip every July to work on the blackberries, which were taking over the balds in the Roan Highlands of Northeast Tennessee. For some 15 of those 21 years, we camped out at the 5,200-foot level of Engine Gap. And Carol and Dave would usually drive up together on Wednesday in order to get the camp set up for the rest of us coming in later in the week. It might be a sweltering 95 degrees here in Knoxville, but it was not unusual to get up there and for it to be windy, cloudy, 60 degrees, and threatening or raining. They would tidy up the backpacks and hike into camp. And we were always amazed with Carol being such a big guy, but essentially living on the ground for 5 days and loving it. His sons never stayed overnight with us, but they generally joined us during the weekend and always brought in a nice cold brews and more food and joined us for the evening meal. Like Carol, we will relish the memories of those camps until our last days. Now the following is what I've come up with.
I was going to say, I thought that sounded familiar.
So Carol, I always saw him as being a very generous person. He was generous with his money, with his time. and just with listening to people, tolerant. You know, and he was always willing to listen to you if you disagreed with him, which I have done before. But I think Carol T. also had a very good sense of humor, and this is kind of exemplified by the following episode. We had gone to Roan Mountain one year. I guess it was probably the first few years we did this because we stayed at a cabin. So we would play Scrabble. And so I had brought my Scrabble dictionary, and Carol T. came up with the word OB. I said, Carol T., that's not a word. He says, sure it is. So we looked it up, wasn't a word, so he lost his turn. Well, several weeks later, I had to get a root canal done. So I go in and, you know, I don't know if any of you, if you've had a root canal, you know that they put you in this chair. They put these blocks in between your teeth. They cover your face with this kind of what's called, I guess, a dam. And anyway, Carol T. comes in there. He's got his headlamp on, and he's ready to work. He leans over, and he says, Mike, he says, is OB a word? Yeah, so I'll definitely will always remember Carol T., and I will miss him greatly.
Me too.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you both. As I mentioned earlier, our minister, Reverend Carroll, is presently on a short sabbatical for a couple of weeks, but she has been in touch with the Coffee family and with leadership here at Westside, and she and the family will let us all know when a memorial service can be arranged. And I'm sure we all have our own ways of coping with this sad news, and we all have memories we would like to share, or many of us, memories we'd like to share of Carol, and I feel sure that we will be able to do this at some time in the future. This is a difficult loss for us to process. So at this time, I would ask you to join me as we sit just together in community for a few minutes, both here in person and on YouTube, as Sandra plays for us. As we light our chalice this morning, I will share these words with you. These come from the UUA Reproductive Justice Action Guide. Our Unitarian Universalist faith affirms that all of our bodies are sacred and that we are each endowed with the twin gifts of agency and conscience. Each of us should have the power to decide what does and doesn't happen to our bodies at every moment of our lives, because consent and bodily autonomy for certain groups of, I read that wrong. Each of us should have the power to decide what does and doesn't happen to our bodies at every moment of our lives, because consent and bodily autonomy are holy. And when disparities in resources or freedoms make it more difficult for certain groups of people to exercise autonomy over their own bodies, our faith compels us to take liberatory action. And at this time, I will turn it over to Elizabeth and Curtis.
Hello. My name is Curtis. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. And I, along with Elizabeth, am going to talk a little bit about just sort of an intro into this now post-Roe world that we are living in. I want to first say, before any of that, that when I first heard the news about Carol, my first thought was, do we want to change this? Do we want to do something different? This is kind of a heavy topic. And Reverend Carol, in all her infinite wisdom, said, sit with it for a minute, go to the Facebook and live with the community for a minute and see what you think. And I read through the comments, and I read Brad's comments, which made me smile. And then I read the link that Brad had posted, which was Carol's own words. And it made me think back on, though I've not known Carol very long, I've had the good fortune of working with him on the reopening committee. He came to a couple of our Thursday meetings when we talked about reproductive freedom and was the lone male voice in the room and jumped right into the conversation. And I thought, so maybe this is the perfect time to talk about this. So Elizabeth and I have been doing multiple things since really we started thinking about this leading up to the fall of Dobbs, and then more intensified after. We've been to a 3-series session that was put on by the UUA, talking about resources and different things that different congregations are doing, and different things that options and just different avenues to take. We've attended meetings with Planned Parenthood. We had one of the members of our Thursday group had I think assistant director is her title, from Planned Parenthood come and speak to us. And we have been meeting with TVUUC in sort of a group, faith-led group that meets regularly to talk about things locally and how to move forward with these things. And we've also, TVUC has now hosted 2 forums. The first one was a forum that had a host of panelists, 2 attorneys and 2 medical providers and a technology expert. And then this last one, which was yesterday, was just a legal forum. It was one of the attorneys who attended the first forum that they provided. So lots and lots of information and lots of things that we're learning. New things come up every day. I'm attending something again this evening. This is a big issue. And we're not going to cover it all today. There's no way. This is an introduction only. But a couple of things I think are striking One is the elephant in the room is the term abortion, and I think it is a really emotional term. I think it has been very politicized, which makes it even more emotional, and it is not even really the entirety of the situation. But I think one of the things they talked about yesterday was the fact that Tennessee, effective with the trigger law coming into effect, abortion is illegal in the state. There are no exceptions. That's it. It's illegal. It is a felony for the provider if a provider performs an abortion. And what is really upsetting to me as a medical person is that there are multiple reasons that women, sometimes abortions are inevitable, sometimes they are the only option given the medical situation, and no matter what the occurrence, no matter what the reason, it is an illegal procedure now. And so I think that if you just look at it from the perspective of medical concerns, because if you shelve the word abortion for a minute and just take some of that emotional piece of it out and look at this as a healthcare crisis, which indeed it is a healthcare crisis, and it is also a situation where an entire population of people, women and childbearing persons, have now lost the right to make their own decisions about their own reproductive health. And that's concerning. That's concerning. But we have to also look at the other ramifications of this, the other things that some of which are already problematic for us in the United States and are just going to be amplified by this decision. So I started looking at outcomes, and I was looking at the signs when I came in and thought that coordinates. I was looking at some outcomes, and there are several studies that compare, so I'm going to kind of whittle down, so hang with me for a minute. But there are several studies that look at multiple comparative to multiple countries, and they, sometimes it compares by wealth, sometimes by industry, but these studies that I looked at compared the United States to 10 other countries of equal wealth and how we compare overall in healthcare, and we're last. We're 11th out of 10. Drill it down a little bit further to maternal newborn outcomes, maternal newborn morbidity, mortality. We are last in this comparative of wealthy countries. And in one of the studies I read, there was a comment that said, the country struggles, the country being the United States, the country struggles with deep problems in affordability of health care, which affects access and equity, and is the country that has the most administrative hurdles when dealing with health care. This is despite the US spending 17% of its gross domestic product on health care, far and away higher than any of the other 10 countries that score much better than us in outcomes. And it goes on to say, this is a study from 20, maybe 21, I can't remember, but it goes on to say that it is really this existing healthcare concern that put us in line for all of the problems we had with COVID. We were already set up to have problems with COVID. So that's kind of the big healthcare picture. So we drill it down a little bit further and look at maternal mortality rates. Approximately 700 women die in the US each year as a result of pregnancy and its complications. If you take that down even further and look at African American women, it triples. The death rate, the mortality and morbidity rate triple for African American women. It is double for Native Americans and Alaskan women. The studies I've seen recently say that Hispanic women are rising, but at this point they are still kind of level with white women. Those statistics are heartbreaking. And if you think about it, going back to the previous paragraph, when you think about access, when you think about affordability, when you think about administrative hurdles, all of those things are going to intensify, and they're the things that really are become concerns for us. I think about the sermon that the Family Promise did 3 weeks ago, and I think, you know, we again lapsing into Elizabeth's piece, so I'm going to bring it down. But there are so many things that this touches. There's so many. There is no way that anybody in this room can say that this decision is not going to impact us. It is going to impact every single one of us in some way, shape, or form. And so I think the last thing I'm going to say, because when you look at our restrictive anti-abortion laws now, if you look at that on a sort of a timeline of least restrictive to most restrictive, there's only one notch that's more restrictive than Tennessee. So in other words, we are just about the most restrictive out there. And so you might think, well, so perhaps, you know, we're doing really great in K through 12, and we're talking about sex education, and we're talking about all this other stuff, and, you know, really trying to help the kids. But in 2012, the Tennessee legislature passed a bill which is known as the Gateway Law, which says we don't really have to do sex education in K through 12 because we might not really be comfortable with that. And if we do, all we can talk about is abstinence. That's it. We can't say anything else. In 2017, another bill was passed that Becky Duncan Massey passed a bill that requires sexual abuse education in schools. But at the end of the day, the kids really aren't getting much in schools, and the parents can opt out of any of it. So they can say they're not comfortable with it and opt out of all of that. So I think, you know, there's a lot to sit with and a lot to think about when it comes to this whole situation we find ourselves in. And to keep in mind that it's not just about abortion. It is about so much more than that. There are so many other things that are wrapped around this that we have to think about, and we have to think how it impacts not just ourselves, but how it impacts our community and the people around us and the people who we interact with every day. And I will throw this out, the cover of our order of service today. If anyone can identify where those words are come from, then you win the big prize. And with that, I'll turn it over to
I think I get to speak first. I would ask you to consider what Westside already does to create safe and sustainable communities. We support programs like Our Whole Lives, which is our approach to sex education on a more whole life approach and a more UU approach. We support Family Promise, and we support numerous organizations through our Share the Plate program. And today, this quarter, our Share the Plate partner is Knox Pride, and we will, at this time, take an offering to support this congregation and the good work that we try to do. Please give freely today so that we are able to continue our valuable assistance in these aims for reproductive justice.
Good morning. I'm Elizabeth Corbett, and my pronouns are she, her, hers, and for our bilingual crowd, ella. And just a reminder about what reproductive justice is. It was a term coined by a group of African American women who said, it's not choice. That's not our problem. Our problem is access. And I'm paraphrasing a little bit here, but it's the right to have children or not have children, and to raise them in safe and sustainable communities. And I'd like you to keep that in mind this morning as we continue on with our service. And when I was a full-time teacher, I used to tell my students all the time to take risks. And of course, some of my students took many risks, and some of them were quite happy to keep on with their same patterns of behavior. But that is a bit of what we as a congregation need to figure out now. What are we as a church comfortable with, and what is a risk for us? You heard a lot from Curtis about what reproductive justice is, and how the two of us have been involved in many, many things to prepare for this service and for the forum in October. Risk is defined as the potential negative consequences of an action or inaction. Risk may include things like financial loss or hardship, legal consequences, internal or external conflict, damage to reputation, physical damage or violence towards people or property, and spiritual, emotional, or psychological harm. So right now, we're going to do a little activity that will help us figure out what we believe as far as how involved our church can be and what our risk level is. Since we're a group of diverse individuals, we can expect that what is too risky for one person might be pretty comfortable for another. One side on your insert in the order of service contains a pair of risk statements. And for those viewing remotely, you will see the statements on your screen. So let's take a look at these two statements. Number one says, the congregation must prioritize care and resources for its own members and should not become a source of funding, logistics, coordination, or spiritual support for activism, organizing, or direct services for non-members. So that's one side of the spectrum. And number 10, the other side says, the congregation should use any and all capacity and resources we have to support anyone engaging in activism, organizing, or direct service related to reproductive justice and other issues that are core to our values. So reflect for a minute, and then hold up your fingers to indicate where you fall on this spectrum. Do you believe 1? Do you believe 10? Are you somewhere in the middle, a 3, a 6, an 8? Where do you fall? So let me read 1 again. The congregation must prioritize care and resources for its own members and should not become a source of funding, logistics, coordination, or spiritual support for activism, organizing, or direct services for non-members. And number 10 says, the congregation should use any and all capacity and resources we have to support anyone engaging in activism, organizing, or direct service related to reproductive justice and other issues that are core to our values. So, think and hold up your hands, hold up your fingers. I see a 9, I see an 8, I see a 7, I see a 9, I see a 7, a 9, 6, an 8. Excellent. So anyone willing to volunteer your position and thinking? And Ellen will walk around with our microphone. And if you're viewing remotely, you can put your number and your thinking in the chat if you want. Anyone willing to share?
Dave Goforth here, and I guess you didn't really talk about it, but in Texas, you can get sued for supporting a woman's needs or rights to choose. Is that not in Tennessee? We don't have such a law. I mean,
Correct.
if we decided to support something.
Correct. You don't want to share your number?
One.
Thank you, David. We'll be talking about this later.
Who invited
No
him?
dinner for you for 3 weeks.
Did I fail the quiz?
Anyone else want to share? Yetta.
Well, anytime you put it down to a dichotomy like that, it simplifies things that are actually pretty complex. And I think the issue of abortion, people have varied opinions on aspects of it and when it should be legal and not legal. So I just want to acknowledge that's partly why I wouldn't assign it a 10. The other one is that I think our organization it's kind of like a Schindler strategy. You have to keep enough resources for the organization for it to persist before you can really, it's like put the oxygen mask on your child before you put it on on yourself before you put it on your child. You have to keep yourself alive before you can really be beneficial to other causes. But with those two caveats, I fully support prioritizing and taking more risks to advance this issue.
Well, and I think number one, and anywhere on the spectrum, number 10 directly says, related to reproductive justice and other issues that are core to our values. So if you think spending some of our resources and our time and our people power on saving the environment, that's core to our values. This is not necessarily about abortion. Anyone else willing to share?
One thing that struck me as you were talking and as that is laid out is there are risks in inaction also. And when you stop and think, what are the risks of doing nothing? It didn't necessarily make me a 10, but it certainly, it's worth thinking about.
Okay, so I was a 7, but I wanted to just kind of comment on the phrase anyone, and I think that kind of, we've been talking about that the last little bit. I know that there's not really a litmus test, and I've never seen a room full of UUs totally agree on everything, but there are some groups, like for example, I'm aware of a pro-racial justice group that has made several transphobic statements. And so we have to really make sure, as I said, not everyone's going to align with us, but we need to make sure that, they support all of our core values as a whole. So I do think that some vetting has to be in place. And just as I said, I do think we have to have a little pot for home. So that's my opinion.
Jonas?
I chose 8. I support a lot of causes as an individual, but pretty much the only way to do that is by financial contributions. But being part of a community with shared views allows me to leverage my activities working with others to do more than I could do as an individual. So that is certainly what I look for in this congregation.
Anyone else? Okay. So as we move on, we have a lot to contemplate. as we continue to consider what more Westside can do as a church and how we can impact the community. We will examine several more of these risk statements at the forum later this fall. And we also want to connect our UU principles to reproductive justice. And as Curtis mentioned, our word web on the order of service cover are keywords from the principles. And just to keep you thinking about the principles and our core values, each week until the forum in October, in the Wednesday newsletter, we'll send out a principle and a few questions for you to reflect on. We'll probably post them on Facebook too, and we're still trying to figure out the best way to get feedback from you about these, so stay tuned to the email about that. And finally, before we finish today, the other side of your insert has a beginning list of options that we can consider as a church. Again, reproductive justice is not only about abortion. There are some statements in there that deal with reproductive health and reproductive choice in abortion, and some statements that are just about serving our community in general. And some involve lots of risk, and others are pretty low risk, though all of them work, as I said, for the aims of reproductive justice. And at the forum, we'll ask for more feedback about these options. And if you have something in your mind that you'd like to see us do as a church, I hope you'll suggest it. Are there any more questions or comments before we go on?
Over here. What is the forum you keep referring to?
I think what we'd like to do, as I said, is try to figure out if we as a church want to do something. And maybe it has nothing to do with reproductive access. I'm looking at the statements here. Do we want to work to increase voter turnout as a church? Volunteer with the local League of Women Voters or something? Do we want to, as a church, volunteer to provide transportation to people who can't drive, to the grocery store, to medical appointments, or just to get out to take a walk? Do we want to read to people in, my husband always says old folks' homes. Do we want to read to people in, I can't even think what they're called now. Retirement communities, thank you. You know, people who can't read, or write letters for people who can't write letters. So again, there's lots of things we could choose to do as a church, and again, we can choose to do nothing. So at this forum, we'll be thinking some more about risk statements, and then maybe considering what we'd like to do. And we intend to go through, I guess, good processes, normal processes, and get things approved by the board. And so that's the forum. I think it'll be the second week in October. So, Ellen, do you mind walking around with the microphone again? Sure. It's not the same day as the auction.
We don't have a specific date for it yet.
We do, I think, but we don't? Okay.
Will it be on a Sunday during service or some other time?
I don't know. We're waiting for Carol to return and a few other things.
I think we're kind of just working things out and trying to get an idea of this is what we want to do and this is the time frame we want to do it in, and I don't think we've got anything really more concrete than that at this point.
It's not next week. We got time to think. Go ahead, Jonas.
Okay, you speak in terms of as a church, and that implies that members of the church might be obliged to support something that they consider of a lower priority than their personal priority.
Correct.
So I think a better structure would be the church organizes subgroups within the congregation that attract people with similar priorities and views, and so the church would act as kind of an organization supporting organizations. With that kind of structure, no one is obliged to support something that they may not prioritize highly.
Like our supportive family promise. I mean, as a church, we support family promise, and some people don't volunteer for that, right?
Trump.
I mean, or cleaning up the highway, you know, or the food basket in the front. I mean, but we as a church support those things, I would say.
So somehow, social justice, gay rights, and so on, are things that, one thing that has been kind of prioritized, probably because of a strong leader in that area. But there are other things as well that under the concept of social justice that I think are important to the community.
Oh, yes, I agree. Yeah. Any other comments? Alice?
It might be too late, but the League of Women...
Come get a microphone here.
I'm slow.
It might be too late, but the League of Women Voters is having a program to teach people how to register new voters. It will be at TVUUC tomorrow night from 6 to 8. And I can give people information, maybe a little bit about it, but the info that I have says you do have to be registered, but I don't know if they would really hold to that or not.
Thank you, Alice. And Brad, unfortunately, I don't see on my phone how to see in the chat. I don't see any questions online. People coming.
There's no question.
Okay, no. I'm just making sure.
One person said they were a 7.
Yes, I just wanted to, when we were talking about this service, we were trying to make sure that people who were viewing remotely had a chance to contribute and ask questions also. So, okay, well, if there are no other questions, Ellen will now lead us in the closing.
Amanda Gorman wrote this line in her poem that she read at Joe Biden's inauguration in 2021. There is always light, if only we're brave enough to see it, if only we're brave enough to be it. As always, we extinguish the light of our chalice, but not the light of truth and the warmth of community or the fire of commitment. These we carry with us in our hearts until we are together again. Thank you. Go in peace.